Thank you. So, good morning, I think. And for the Swedes out there, greetings from your Eastern neighbor, your friendly Eastern neighbor. It's been a really, really big pleasure to be here. I met the organizers in SMXL Milan last year, and we talked about this event. And the composition of the event just sounded perfect to me. Like there's a perfect mix of search marketing here. But when I saw the titles of the talks and the descriptions of the talks, I can see that we're going to be heading into developer territory as well. Not in terms of like giving it really offloading a lot of technical stuff necessarily, but in terms of how to build our organizations and how to communicate across these silos that we tend to build in these organizations. And what I want to talk about today just jumps right into this topic. I have to preface it a bit, especially the C's. I spent a considerable amount of my professional life trying to fix problems and being there to fix problems, being in customer support roles, volunteering in communities. I'm sorry, but there's a pillar there, so I'll try to go around it every now and then. So trying to just fix problems. I'm trying to come up with technical solutions to technical problems. And it's been very fulfilling. It's a really great way to keep your edge sharp and to build your skills in so many different verticals, for example. But the more you do it, and especially when you help organizations do it, the more you feel like a Band-Aid, or just like a quick pinch of the wound to keep the blood from not flowing out. But you're not really doing anything to quench whatever is actually creating those problems, and you're not doing anything to stop those wounds from coming up. You're just fixing those wounds, you're fixing those mistakes, but you're not digging into the organization's fabric and trying to figure out where these problems are coming from. And so as much as I would love to give a talk where I tell you all about the cool solutions to cool technical problems you might be having, and you'll leave out of here really inspired to do all that stuff when you're going back to your office, I want to do something that's way more demoralizing and depressing and talk about our organizations. Because our organizations are completely fallible. They're broken by default. And we have to fight against the human urge of breaking them further every single day we go to work. We have to fight against those silos from merging because there's such a natural way to build your environment in an organization. Silos are so easy. If you have a silo, you can have your own budget, your own goals. You don't have to worry about anything what other people are doing in the organization, as long as you keep your own office clean. But we all know that, especially when the organization grows past a certain point, these silos start to act against the organization's growth. So after all this preface, well, maybe I'll skip that. We'll talk about data culture and data customization and communication and all this kind of stuff, all these C's that I mentioned. And what we're talking about when we're trying to figure out how these problems emerge is communication. Communication structures, communication issues. How do we build teams that are not riddled by these stereotypes, the grumbling IT down in the cellar, drinking cold cola and eating cold pizza, and refusing to implement anything that you might want as a marketeer to implement. Or the marketers who don't care about anything that goes on under the hood and just go whizzing from one campaign to the next and arguing, why aren't my tickets being processed through Jira fast enough? And then we have the business stereotype, the people who waltz into the room, take a look at a couple of PDFs that have been printed out for them, and imagine that they can actually divulge some information from these numbers that will help the company move forward. And this is all this it's all this big bubble that we're creating with these silos. We're feeding into this machine because we know that that's the easy way out. But now let's take the thought experiment of what if we try to figure out ways to not fall into these stereotypes and start building multidisciplinary teams. Because my thesis and my argument as a consultant, specifically a consultant who's really invested in doing this stuff, is that when you fix those communication structures, those problems that emerge within these silos are either fixed automatically or they are in decline, and you will have a more robust way to operate in general. But there are, of course, different ways to fix these communication issues. But the first thing I want to mention is this wonderful gentleman who's in my top list of people whose brain I want to devour, and in Halloween spirit, I think. Mel Conway is a computer scientist, and in the 60s, he spoke at a conference or wrote a paper. I'm not actually entirely sure about the origin story, where he mentioned this idea that when you have two systems that need to communicate, and this is 60s, so we're talking about computers the size of rooms or something like that, and the messages are being passed with punch cards or some rudimentary networking. When you have two systems that need to communicate, any message that will be passed through will be a product of how well the people operating those systems communicate. And at its most reduced format, it means that if the engineers operating computers will not communicate with each other, then the computers will find it extremely difficult to communicate with each other as a result. So any messages that we want to pass from one system to the other they're burdened by the communication structures that are supposed to support those messages. And this was in the 60s. And now I can take the easy way out and say that it's been tested time and time again, and it's still valid, even once we no longer have those computers the size of rooms. Now, when we talk about a system, we're talking about a system of interconnected services. We see this in the cloud platform all the time. We have these microservices that are brought together to build something bigger and to offer you data at scale or services at scale. But it doesn't mean that this problem has gone away. Conway's law is more prevalent than ever because the people who operate those different services now need to communicate. And the one thing that has changed from the 60s, not the one thing, like one of the things that has changed in the 60s, I wasn't there in the 60s, so I can't give you the full thing, is that when we talk about data and analytics, it's way more democratized than it was back then. But with that comes the problem that any data set that we use in an organization will be a product of that organization, right? That's the logical train of conclusion here. And what that means is that if the organization has problems in communicating their message across these different parts of the organization, the data set produced by that organization will show those blemishes. And this is apparent, for example, let's say you're working with collecting data from users who make purchases on your website. And you're collecting data in Google Analytics, and then you're collecting data in your sales engine, right? Well, obviously, you're not going to be collecting all that data in Google Analytics. You're not going to get the full number of your sales in Google Analytics by default. And why is that? Just one idea. Why isn't Google Analytics collecting all the data? Yes? Yes, it's a client-side collection mechanism, and it's riddled by the problems of client-side data collection. Not problems necessarily, but features of client-side data collection. People are blocking analytics tools. There's browser initiatives trying to quench our use of cookies, like ITP with Safari and ETP with Firefox, and they're like really unimaginative with these acronyms. But different TPs of protection. So any data produced by GA will not be necessarily compatible with that collected by your sales engine. So then when you build a data pipeline to bring it all together, so you want to see the full customer journey of somebody who made a purchase, for example, and you take a look at the transaction ID collected by your sales engine, and then you go to your GA data set, and you look for that transaction ID, and you don't find it there. And this happens usually at the point where you're actually doing the analysis in BigQuery or your data warehouse. You should have known that it's not there. You should have had a contingency in place, and you should have communicated with whatever team is collecting that data into the sales engine so that you don't arrive at this problem in the first place, that you annotate those transactions that don't have a corresponding data set in GA, for example. So by failure of communication, you have a patchy data set. And at this point, a data engineer would then throw a bunch of ETL processes at the data, try to fix those holes with tools. We have so many tools that can fix problems with data quality, and we just throw as many as we can at the problem and see what sticks. And then try something else because we got a good fat sponsoring fee from it or something else. But these are just tools. So we're throwing tools at problems that shouldn't have been there in the first place. And now as a conference presenter, it's so easy for me to say that this is such an easy problem to solve. Just communicate. Because communication is so easy when you're dealing with people that you hate on a daily basis. Just go out for a beer with that dick from marketing and you'll patch it out and then you'll produce great data after that. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. How to take the people you hate out for a beer. Okay. The magic clicker is back. Oh wait, now it's the whole computer. Oh, the mouse? Oh. Genius. These computers are so fascinating things. So then when we talk about this, how to build these teams, let's see what a typical team, and not a typical team, but one type of a team might be. So we have, especially in consultancies, we have super skilled people, technical people who handle tools really well. And you hire them into your in-house teams, or you hire them into your organization precisely because they can deliver with those tools. GA is unfortunately extremely proliferated with these types of organizations. Organizations whose only purpose is to audit Google Analytics and fix Google Analytics, which is fine, I guess. But fixing Google Analytics brings your data quality to what it should be. It doesn't tell your organization how to produce better results, how to grow. It just gives you good data. So the problem is that we have quick wins with this type of a team. We have teams designed specifically to find those problems and fix them. And I've been part of these teams, and I know how fulfilling it is and how easy it is to sell my wares, because everybody has problems with their data collection. It's the easiest thing in the world to sell. The data might not be bad, but I can point at it, shine a different type of light on it, and show you that it could be better. These are parlor tricks. They're just street magic. Martin can show you some Google Analytics magic, maybe. I don't know. That was a weird, weird thing to say. But these are parlor tricks, right? And we have to go beyond them. So what do? We find a team who has a strategy down to pat. We know that without a strategy, tools are just aimless vessels in an uncharted ocean of growth. Buzzword. But we have these consultants, we have management consultants, we have organizational coaches whose priority is to show you how to build a measurement plan, what type of data to collect, how to grow as a company, how to find the right partners, how to do the right recruitments. But without an understanding of the technical capabilities of the organization, without an understanding of the data the organization collects, these people and these teams fall into the trap of solutionism. And solutionism is beautifully defined or described by Matt Gershoff, who's a wonderful thinker in the data science space. But his idea and his thesis is that we have words like AI strategy, VR strategy, AR strategy, IoT strategy, insert acronym strategy. And we sell these on a promise that every single company out there now needs an AI strategy. You need it because AI is the next big thing. So then companies pay 500,000 euros an hour for some hotshot data science strategist who says that, yeah, I can help you build this. I'll build this. No, I'll build this so well. But then they face the problems that we don't actually have any data. And as it turns out, AI is pretty crippled without data. Or we have data, but we have the problem that I was explaining in the beginning, where we have data here that's really patchy, and we're trying to combine it with data here that's not patchy, and we expect that they merge in some holy matrimony and produce results because the magic of AI will fix those holes. I'm exaggerating, of course, but this is still a general vein of thought when we have these strategies. So we need to go past this vacuous hand-waving in the boardroom, and we need to build teams that have both of these. We need to know what our technical capabilities are, what we can deliver. And then we need the light in the horizon that tells us where to steer our ship towards. And you might say that, okay, now we have the perfect team. But let me tell you one company who had this. A little Finnish mobile phone manufacturer called Nokia had this. They had the best engineers in the world. Best mobile phone hardware engineers in the world. They hired so many amazing strategists. Their board was full of like the who's who of business development in the world. They had the biggest names, and they still failed spectacularly. Like they crumbled. And our national identity was married to Nokia. Like we were Nokia. It was the biggest company in Finland. It was one of the biggest companies in the world. And I still get a bit teary-eyed when I talk about it. I worked at Nokia. It was my first job. My parents worked at Nokia for their whole lives before they were a mobile phone and a networking company. I think they did boots or tires. So the point is, this isn't yet enough. It doesn't matter if you have the best tech, it doesn't matter if you have the best strategists if they don't talk to each other. So now, mind-blowing moment number one of this talk, we need maturity. We need a way to make sure that any preconceptions and predispositions inherently present in these diagram bubbles are overcome by a maturity to evolve past these silos. We need a way to have strategic discussions with the technical people and involve the technical people in developing our strategies. And this is, again, it's so easy to say that just be agile. Why is agile so significant? Well, agility and the agile and the lean methodologies are built on communication. That's the one single thing that matters most. Constant communication. And that communication then lives its own life in different frameworks like Scrum, where there's a constant reevaluation of your goals and constant introspection and retrospection. But we need a way to get the message across. So one of the ways that we start thinking about this is we take a look at our teams. Here's one type of a team that I think many people have experience in. We get a project, we have a plan that we need to deliver, and then we give the plan to the developers by way of writing a Jira ticket or something, and they start working on it. And they work on it, and they work on it, and they work on it. They laboriously go through the plan. It's typically an Excel sheet with 750 different features that need to be implemented. This is typically in the public sector in Finland, for example, because RFPs need this type of a waterfall approach for some reason. It's just built into the system. But the problem is, there's no involvement. The people who are waiting for the results are literally waiting for the results. They're not involving themselves. They're waiting for the developers to say that, hey, we have a release out now. Now you can test it. It's actually live already, so it's too late to test it. But you'll get the data now. So we don't have any communication here. We are simply working on plans. And this is a spectacularly miserable way to do a project. So how do we start fixing this? Well, how do we improve communication? We start with quantity. We add reasons to communicate. We add meetings. I know it sounds like a bad idea, but bear with me. We add reasons to talk. So we build these structures. We have a periodic meeting between the data people and IT. We have a periodic meeting between UX team and the IT people. And IT is just shorthand for developers in this case. We have marketing who's talking with biz about what we're going to get in a short while. So we have, at least they're talking. At least they're communicating. But the problem here is they're not actually talking about or around the project. Who knows what they're talking about in those little meeting rooms of theirs? It turns into this giant game of Chinese whispers where, I start from there and I whisper you a word and then you whisper it to the next one and so on and so on and so on. And then we get to that corner and there's going to be something completely different than what we started with. This is what happens. We've built the communication structures, which is good. We're discussing, but we don't know if we're discussing the right things. So then, how do we fix this? And this is where Agile comes in. We make those discussions, we build those communication structures around the project itself. And so Scrum, for example, has the tools for you. You don't have to adopt Scrum. I'm not evangelizing Scrum. I think it's a very faulty system in many ways. But you can take a leaf out of its book, have daily meetings in front of the backlog with your entire multidisciplinary team in place. Discuss with them what's going on in the project, go through all the steps, go through everything that's going on with implementing this marketing campaign or this ad campaign or this search campaign. Because if problems arise, that's the best place to voice them. My role in many Agile teams is to say that, by the way, this might be interesting thing to collect data for. Because nothing's as depressing as 6 months later when the release comes out to realize that, oh man, I should have thought about data collection. For an analyst, nothing's as depressing. Oh, plenty of things in the world more depressing than that, but in a professional context, my friends. We live in a horrible state of things at the moment, so let's not bring politics here. So once we have this stuff in place, so let's say we've now tried to do this, and there are lots and lots of documentation about Scrum, and I'm happy to talk about it in the breaks as well. But then let's look at the tools themselves and see how difficult they make this for us. Analytics tools like Google Analytics are designed for the masses. There's a group of white lab coat technicians somewhere in the depths of Irvine, California, figuring out what your organization needs. Okay, if that's what you imagine, then we have a lot of ground to cover. But the problem is that by implementing GA, by putting the GA snippet on your site and leaving it there, not customizing it one bit, my argument is that it's worse than not having the GA snippet there at all. You're only collecting the first page view of every page. If it's a single page app, that's the only thing you'll be collecting. And even if it's a multi-page app with regular page loads, you're only collecting page views. You're not collecting any events. You're not collecting any interactions the user might have on the site. So you're getting data that's misleading. If you're one of those people who think bounce rate is a good metric, well, if you're only collecting page views, well then it's definitely not a good metric. Because I can land on your site, stay on the landing page, find a phone number there, call it, and buy $15 billion worth of merchandise. I was your best customer for the entire decade. But Google Analytics will say that I was a bounce. I was a bad visitor. So it doesn't make any sense. And then when we go to the nitty-gritty, and this is where communication becomes important, because let's say we're collecting sessions in Google Analytics, and we're reporting on sessions. Not necessarily a good idea, but we still do it, because conversion rate is unfortunately bound to those sessions. And then we have another tool like Firebase Analytics, or Snowplow Analytics, or some other tool that also uses the concept of a session. Now, this is a Google Analytics session. The things that you cannot see highlighted because the font contrast is so bad are the things that you can actually manually configure in a session. You can configure the 30-minute timeout of non-interaction that breaks a session apart. You can configure when midnight occurs by changing the time zone, not by not by being God or anything, but just you can change the time zone. You can choose the campaign timeout. By default, it's 6 months. So did you know that when you visit a site through organic search, for example, for the next 6 months, every single direct visit of yours will also be labeled as organic? You can change that. You can change all this stuff. But the thing is, this is an algorithm. By default, it has a 30-minute timeout. By default, it configures to the midnight of your GA. By default, there are no referral exclusions except the one for your own domain. By default, the campaign timeout is 6 months. And now this is a typical GA report, and the revenue is not my money. Don't be lulled into thinking that. If you change any one of those things that were labeled in red in that previous this algorithm, if you change any one of these, even the smallest bit, change the timeout from 30 minutes to 29 minutes, add a new referral exclusion, add a new cross-domain tracking domain, every single one of these metrics pointed to by the, I'm a bit colorblind, but I guess the red arrow will change as a result. Your bounce rate will change because the configuration of a session is now different. Your pages per session will change. Your e-commerce conversion rate will change because the concept of a session is now different. So you manage to change all these metrics without actually making any changes to the business. So this is how fragile these tools are. And when you're building your reports and your data pipelines and you're talking about conversion rates to your seniors and your CEOs and whoever, bear in mind that they might not understand this complexity, that to them an uplifting conversion rate is always a good thing. But it might not be a good thing in terms of like how much revenue your business is generating. It might be just one enlightened analyst tweaked the algorithm, or some unknowledgeable analyst tweaked it the wrong way. Like getting a 100% conversion rate is super easy, and this is like a CRO technique, number one. You create a goal in GA, and you have it match every single page of your domain. So now every single session becomes a conversion, and you can present a 100% conversion rate to your boss. You're welcome. The first tip is free. So what I'm going after is that when we have, the reason we are trying to build teams that communicate is because we need to get the message across that the tools that we use require customization. And GA has this type of data. So Firebase has this type of data. So if we want our data sets to converge so that we can get this famous 360 view or 720, which is twice around, which is twice better, we need to know the idiosyncrasies of each platform so that we can explain why are Google Analytics sessions like this, why are Google Ads sessions like this, why is Search Console reporting these clicks, but GA is giving these sessions. So we need to have this knowledge inside, and then we need to use this information to share the knowledge across our teams so that we don't fall into the trap of solutionism. So I have 5 minutes, which gives me ample time to get to the second half of my presentation. Let's take something like engagement. So a typical engagement metric in Google Analytics is that of bounce rate. And average session duration is another one. And bounce rate is the ratio of sessions that only had a single interaction hit, a page view or an event, for example. Average session duration is counted from the first interactive hit to the last hit of the session. That's the delta of the average session duration. Using these two metrics to conflate something as infinitely complex as engagement, these are the things that you should maybe be measuring in GA, but that GA doesn't do by default. Page visibility. Are you collecting page views from users who actually don't view your page? Did you ever think about the semantic conundrum there? Page view implies that the user saw the page. What if the page was never visible in the browser? What if it was a minimized browser? It was a hidden browser underneath another tab. You're collecting all this information about these people viewing your page, but you don't actually know if it's qualified or not. Interaction. Are you measuring clicks, scrolls, key presses, long presses, drags, scaling, highlighting, copying to the clipboard? All of these are signals that the user is telling you in almost plain English that, hey, I'm doing something on your site. I'm engaging with your content in different ways. Are you collecting this information? What about time? Time is so difficult. Time on page. How does Google know what I'm doing with my time? Am I on page or not? If I go and put a kettle on or walk my dog or somebody else's dog because I don't have one, play with my son or something, Google is still keeping the timer running. And when I come back to the site and hit a button and do something, if it's within a specific timeout, it's still going to be collected as accumulated time on page. You can change that. You can tell Google Analytics to only measure time for active engagement, only measure time when the user is actually doing something, moving the mouse, scrolling, pressing keys. Then there are short-term goals. Are you measuring subscriptions, hearts or likes, printing, sharing on social media? All of these are signals the users are trying to tell you that, hey, I'm a good user. Please listen to them. Long-term goals, more difficult, revenue per user, recruitment, growth. All of these things are what your GA data should be feeding into. And qualitative stuff like Hotjar, heat maps, and session recording, and so on. And now, because I don't want to ever do a talk without showing some technical stuff, let's take visibility, which I already introduced. You can actually, and I'll share these slides, and this is a guide how to implement this, but you can actually get a report where you add a secondary dimension in GA, which tells you how many times the page was viewed while being not visible. So false is hidden true, sorry. So if the page is not visible in the browser viewport, it would send the value true in this column. So interestingly, my most viewed article for whatever period of time is this enhanced e-commerce guide, but only, now I need to do some mathematics, hold on. Yeah, okay. So only about 66-70% are actually viewed in the browser window. The rest are opened in browser tabs, never to be opened again. The way too rarely spoken of graveyard of content is the browser tab that is never visited. It's a support group for browser tabs is what I'm calling for here. So this is interesting stuff for me. I'm happy it's not a trend. I'm happy it's not like the top 10 is hidden pages, because then I would have a really, really interesting discussion with my developer self. Another thing was this dwell time, how much users are actually actively spending on the time. So I did this. You know, who hasn't heard of Chartbeat? Notice hasn't. So Chartbeat is a tool that measures the pulse of visits on a page. Publishers use it, and it's a great tool for that. It's like real-time analytics, how many people are currently engaging with the content. And Chartbeat does exactly what I replicated in GA in this article, so you can implement it yourself. It tells you, out of all the time spent on a page, how much is active time? How user is moving the mouse, clicking buttons, scrolling. And then if they idle, if they don't do anything for more than 5 seconds, they're set as idling and the timer is stopped. So the result was staggering. The average time on page for these pages, by average, was almost 6 to 7 times more than the actual engagement time. It's a huge margin. So people are engaging with the content far less than what average time on page tells me. And this is a different way to stack the results. I'm not saying there's not value in getting time on page, because that might answer certain questions, but it's just not the whole truth. So we're getting to the wrap up. I was kidding about the half. So why are we here today? We're here today because Martin is here, and because there are so many difficult things. Sorry. There's so many difficult things about the things we do, right? We're here because this is a knowledge sharing event where people can tell other people what they know and the other people might not know. With data, this is especially important because the whole industry of analytics relies on so many different moving parts and so many little triggers that might destroy data quality that only the best ETL in the world can patch. So data quality is something you earn. You don't acquire it simply by installing GA. That's just foolish thinking. You have to work towards it. So data quality is an investment. We need to build these teams, and we need to look for the little maturity toggle there that will help the tech and the biz people talk to each other. And this is, like I said, it's really cool that Agile already does this. It introduces multidisciplinary teams. You can't have an Agile team of only develop, or you can for certain cases. But when you're talking about marketing campaigns, for example, you need the full approach. You need somebody who understands marketing and somebody who understands implementation, somebody who can look in the telescope to see what's happening in the future horizons, and somebody who can, wipe the rear view mirror to see what happened in the past. Key takeaway number 2, Mr. Conway is amazing. Communication structures are everything. The way we communicate across those silos are the way we build our data quality up to par. The tools you use are complex and borderline useless when deployed by default, until you tell those tools that, hey, this is my organization, this is how it works. You encode it into how that tool works. You tell GA to tell you how your organization is actually doing. And with these words, I humbly thank you and hope you enjoy the rest of the day.